Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. And it all depends on one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. But I'm still on hiatus dealing with the Zettelkasten. And today, the episode is courtesy of Alex. Alex asked some really interesting questions on indexing. So that's why my index box is out. It's sitting here where I'm going to switch over and show you, do some indexing right on the spot. But he had some really interesting points. And his first question is, what about using a minimal sparse approach instead of a multi-keyword indexing? He wants to know if perhaps multi-keywords is fragmenting your focus. Well, that's already got several interesting answers. So I'm going to deal with that part of it right now. And then, of course, there'll be an extension when we're looking at cards. First of all, the question of a sparse index. I have to tell you, Alex, it's up to you, of course. It's your Zettelkasten, and you have to see what works best for you. I can only share what I'm finding works best for me because we're all individuals and we all have different reasons for keeping our Zettelkastens. Some like digital, some like analog, some like sparse index. I like a full phrase index. So and also I should let you know that a sparse index is actually the norm. I am a real outlier. I am probably at the extreme of the outlier end in terms of the length of my index entries. I'm about as crazy as you can go there. But I would have to take a quibble with calling it a multi-keyword index. Yes, it turns out to have multiple keywords in the entry, but it's not predominantly a multi-keyword index. It is a card capture. What I try to do, and this before I even start indexing, I will read through my card, think about what the card said, think about my response to what I learned, kind of hold it all in my heart, and then try to come up with a one line that will summarize the whole thing for me so that when I read this line, the whole card comes back to mind. That's my goal. It's like my prompt line to bring the whole card back to me. So it's not multiple keywords. It's a thought, a succinct expression of a thought. And that thought is meant to capture the whole essence of this card. And not just the essence of the card, like, oh, this is the one thing I want to remember. No, I want that keyword to suddenly, oh, the whole card comes back. Oh, yes, and they said this, and I thought that, and it was in this spot in the book. You know, it's just a whole experience that comes to flower when I read that one line. So that's why I would say that for me, and again, you have to experiment, it's definitely not fragmenting my focus. It's sharpening my focus. It's engaging my focus. And not only that, what I'm trying to do with why I don't focus on keywords, I really, really don't. And that's why I don't keep a sparse index, because even if you narrow it down to one keyword, well, that doesn't mean when you're focusing on keywords at all, that's a very left brain activity. That's a logical mind making a deduction, choosing the best keyword. That's all very left brain. And you're leaving your creative side to go wandering. Okay, we're done with you. Now you go wander and have fun, and I'm going to come up with a keyword, and then I'm going to put some numbers down. So you're not interested in that anyway. You emotional side of me, go away. No, I don't. I want to keep my whole brain engaged. And so I want to capture the feeling and the emotion and the content of that card and keep that excitement of that idea in my mind all the while I'm indexing. And then when I'm comparing entries, I'm comparing other prompt lines that bring back other whole cards. But we'll talk about that when we start looking at the cards. So bottom line, you have to try out what, do what works for you, but do try an A/B test, because, and I'm not going to say any more on it until we're looking at cards. Okay, now the next question that Alex asks is really a good one. Totally spot on. Well, what if the best match in your Zettelkasten does not have any keywords in common with that tagline that you put on the card? And the answer to that is, oh yeah. Oh, that happens. You bet that happens. Maybe as much as 30% of the time. It's not at all uncommon that that's true. I love the fact that you were saying that, isn't it better to flip through your box to get the best match? Oh man, when your box is still small, when your Zettelkasten is still small, Alex, you are right on. That is the very best way to find where that card goes. So much will come back to you when you flip through that box. It'll energize you. It'll get your whole brain going active, both sides of your brain's active. You bet. That is, as long as your Zettelkasten is small enough that you can, that is the number one best way to find the card that goes with it. However, there's 8 boxes. There's 6 of them are actually fully in use, being my Zettelkasten. I can't do that anymore. It's gotten too big. However, my index box, which you can't see it, but it's right here, because I have those taglines that bring back the whole card, I can effectively flip through my whole box by flipping through my index. However, as you'll see when we point down at the index, it's about 8 inches thick of cards, and there's no way that I can even flip through the whole of that multi-lines on every card. I can't flip through them all. So what do I do when I have one of those cards where, I've checked out the keywords and no, this is not matching where my card goes? Then I have to think about synonyms, and then I have to ponder the whole idea and generate other ideas of where that card might be. And the most incredible thing is that very often I will get one of those serendipitous links, and you did mention that possibility, flipping through your box, definitely why you would flip through the box. But I will often get those serendipitous links just going through my index. And I'll say, whoa, that's where that card goes. And it, it might have been in the letter A, but it wasn't the keyword I was looking for. But there's the match. Also, because I have a whole sentence and I might have multiple words underlined in that sentence, I will also take a focused approach and try and go for the most likely keyword first. And then even if I don't match on that keyword, I might go right away for that concept rather than starting to go with some of the supporting keywords. So that takes care of those 2 questions. And the third one I'm going to save for the end, because Alex brought up a really interesting concept of what an index could be that's quite creative, and it is not the usual, what we usually talk about in being an index, and it's worthy of thought. And so I'm going to save that for when we pop back face to face after we look at cards. So have to stay to the end to get Alex's really interesting take on what you might put in an index. Okay, so we're going to switch over to cards now, and we're going to actually do a little bit of indexing so you can see what I'm talking about. See you over at the cards. Okay, here we are over at the desk, and this is my index that I'm going to be working with. And this is my working box that I've showed you yesterday. I showed you some pieces of the working box. Yesterday, I confessed that my section of unfiled cards had kind of grown to inappropriate proportions. And so today, I worked on them quite a bit. and I'll tell you an answer for part of how I find the time to do all these things. I happened to be in a Zoom call that was very lengthy, and while it was quite interesting, not all of the call was applicable to me or of enormous interest to me. So I was kind of listening to the call with one ear and stop whenever anything was super relevant. But in the meantime, when things were not quite as relevant, I went through my cards and supplied these taglines for quite a number of them. So that is a preparation to indexing, is to build these lines that capture the whole card. So I did some of that during a Zoom call. So you can find times to do these things. It doesn't all take your 100% best concentration time. And then I also discovered in that process that a good half of the cards were just random thoughts that I threw in there that might not even ever make it into my Zettelkasten. I've got to give them a serious thought. I think, am I going to develop them or am I going to just discard them? And if I discard them, they don't get totally thrown away. They do live life as spacers. Junk mail also ends up in my spacers, and these do a great job of taking up spare space at the back end of a drawer. So nothing goes to waste. Okay, but our focus here is on what are the issues that we run into when we're filing a card. And so I wanted to take a real card and go through those issues that Alex so wonderfully brought up. So I'm going to set this box aside so it's not distracting us. And we're going to focus on the index box. Now, as you can see, there's quite a few index cards here. If I take out a ruler, we're really talking about 6 inches deep of cards. So that is getting pretty close to 1,000 cards in the index. And when you consider that a given card might easily have 12 or more lines on it, we're talking about pushing 12,000 index entries. So that's not something that you're going to be able to thoroughly browse. But serendipity does happen, and we're always going to be open to that. So here is the card that I am looking to file. This is from Adolphe Tanqueray, The Spiritual Life. And this is to where it is in the book. And he makes a point that a sinner must resist temptation by practicing the virtues opposed to the vices that they must avoid. Well, as you probably know in my work about human motivations, I refer to the character traits, because if you're going to be a fiction writer, it's very nice to talk about virtues, but you really do have to have the full spectrum. And to take it out of the realm of judgment, I just prefer to use the term character trait. Not heroes can have challenges in their character. So I don't like the word vice, because that kind of implies too much that you're dealing with a villain. Now, mind you, you can have some fun with vices when you're creating your villains. But all that being aside, I wanted to place this card. And so after relating my thoughts and Tanqueray's thoughts, I felt that the line that best captured the whole essence of that card and brought the whole card back to me was to say that you must practice the virtue opposed to the vice. I tend to have some quibbles with that, but then that's my reaction. This is what the content that I'm dealing with. So now I want to file this card. So I'm not going to start with practice and opposed. I'm going to start with virtue, because it's most closely related to what I'm trying to get at with the card. So I'm most likely to find my best card that this goes with in the section on virtue. So I'm going to pull that area. When I pull an entire letter of the alphabet. I don't fool around. Now, if the letter of the alphabet's gotten too fat, like the S's, then I break it up so that I can pull an entire section of the S's, because I like to deal with a whole section at a time. Again, partly that's because of that serendipity. You have more to work with in your hands. So when I'm looking for something, I'm looking for the keyword virtue. The first thing I'm going to do is flip through and find out if that word has a card for it. Oh my gosh, does it ever? Well, I guess not surprisingly, since that's my area of research. So there's a whole gazillion cards related to virtue. So now I'm going to isolate those. And now, this is what I just have discovered and why I've gone to the longer forms of expressing an entire idea as the tagline. When I come to these purple guys, those were names of sections, dividers, if you will. And I found that looking at these phrases, I don't get any involvement of the right side of my brain. I don't get any creative juices flowing. And I can't look at that and say, this is going to match with my card, because it doesn't really tell me anything. So when I'm looking, I'm just going to skip right past all of those guys. And to me, that is the short form. That is the kind of the more sparse, minimal approach to indexing would be to have just those few words. And I find those, when I go back and look at them, they're sterile. They don't bring anything back to mind. I have to construct something from the words themselves. It doesn't bring the whole card back into flesh. Whereas when I look at this, a whole page full of those things, it was just useless for trying to find a match. So I went through these and I found a couple that were really interesting to me. And I put them, I use these scribble cards. And I mean, I use every square inch on the cards. But I ended up with two that I thought were worth pulling. So I wrote the two numbers down on this card. And then I went and pulled the cards. Now, let's take a look first on this. Let's look at this 2B first. I circled it, which probably means that I thought it was the best match. I did that this morning. When I pull a card, I don't pull just the card. 2B was the card that matched, but I don't just pull that card. I pull the whole section. All of the cards in that. I use a lot of dividers to keep things in small clumps. And I pull the whole clump. While I'm here, I might as well show you. I've done a lot of experimentation on directories. Like this was a directory card that's just served as a marker for a section. And then for a while, and I might go back to it because I kind of liked it, I was using starting and ending directory cards, so that I could tell, oh, all of these between here and here were in that group. It's just another experiment that I've tried. Okay, so 2B, the tagline that will bring back this whole card to me is the easiest daughter virtue of the needed cardinal virtue. That's not quite a whole thought, but it brought the whole card back to me. And this is actually oops, can you hardly read it here? This is actually a competing idea to the idea expressed in the card I'm trying to follow. The card that I'm trying to file says that the best way to combat a vice is to work on the opposing virtue. And sometimes in character development, it turns out that when you are trying to write a story that involves character traits, you can't go at it with the direct opposite. You can't make believable actions that make progress. It's often too stark. There's no way to motivate that transition in the character. But if you look at the related virtues, you can often find a virtue in the same group, in the same character trait group and subgroup, that is much more approachable for the main character. And so especially if you're trying to take your main character on a path to gaining something missing from the character profile, then what you really need to do is to work on not go straight at the virtue, but go at the easiest related virtue. And I don't want to go into the whole theory of that. But this I thought was very likely to be my path, because this really gets some interesting thoughts going. Well, is this the best method or is this the best method? If you're writing a story, you are not going to get anything believable out of this. This approach will give you something much more believable. So right now, this is the candidate place where I'm going to file my card. And I did look at all of the other ones in here, and it was quite interesting. Some of the insights that I found by looking through those. Really gets the creative side of my brain going, keeps the creative side of my brain engaged and interested, so that I'm approaching this task with a whole brain. But let me take a look at the other cluster. Okay, the other cluster, I was looking for a card. If I can find, I can't find my little reference card anymore. Oh, here it is. 2F4A 2B. And that one is, this is an early card. As you can tell, it's a 3x5. It's from 2023, early 2023, when I was using the smaller card size. And I didn't have a full tagline. I just had video number 1 dash truth. So I had to read the whole card to bring it back. And it was a rather interesting thought, which is the concept that every virtue that is not fully expressed in our lives leaves some part of our potential curled up inside of us. And that the idea was that if we find a way to express that virtue, then that potential uncurls, and our power grows, our joy grows, our happiness, wonder, and tranquility grow. And I had a follow-on card to that as well, which is that through a reflective study of the virtues, we can spot our undeveloped potential, release it, cultivate it, and watch our lives grow in joy, happiness, and wonder, tranquility, and harmony. So I thought, well, that's a stimulating thought, and it's really interesting concept, but it's really not the best match, because this isn't really talking about how do you combat a vice, how do you go from having lacking in a character trait to growing in a character trait. It's telling you that yes, it's very good to grow in a character trait and you'll get some great things coming out of it, but it's not telling you how. So consequently, I have decided that this card, 2B is my best match for my card. So now that means that I'm committed already, and I'm going to go ahead and write on that card that I can tell you without even thinking about it. Well, I can't. I could tell you that it's 2B1, but I don't know. Is there already a 2B1? And but I look at the box. No, there isn't. So I'm good to go. And this card becomes 2B1. And at this point in time, a lot of the fun has already been done in placing this card. Now, the next thing that I'm going to need to do is visit 3 keywords and place this whole tagline in each of those places. And it's really interesting too, because when I do that, it's still because I'm mixing with entire taglines that bring back whole cards. My whole brain will remain engaged, although it's not quite as exciting and stimulating as finding the place where the card goes. I have to make sure I tempt my creative mind by actually reading these other cards and say, whoa, what have I got there? What have I got there? Like, I don't know what I'm going to find in practice. Let me see, maybe that will help us. Here, practice. Okay, so here's going to be a whole different things, but look at a lot of these just don't really tell you, aren't going to be bringing myself up unless, because they're older and they aren't the full taglines that are going to bring excitement. So I have to work a little bit harder during the filing stage. But so that is why, that in a nutshell is why I go ahead and use the full tagline. It keeps both halves of my brain engaged, and by mixing in with these two ideas, the concept of it helped me shape the whole question for, well, why not? Why wouldn't you take a fictional character and have that fictional character directly practice the virtue that's opposed to their vice? And the answer is usually because it's just out of reach for them. But in order to explain why that is the case, I would have to go into my character profile diagram, and I don't have time to do that tonight. So I hope you enjoyed this foray into how and why I index, but I've got another whole section coming up, which is Alex's really, really interesting idea of what else you could do with an index. And I haven't heard it expressed anywhere else. So stick around. We'll come back face to face and we'll talk about that. Thank you. Okay, now for Alex's fresh idea. Try this out. See what you think about this. I'd love to see a discussion get going on this over in lilybub.org, where we have a nice discussion area where we can all share ideas, because Alex had the really interesting concept. What if, instead of tracking keywords or even taglines to throw mine in, what if our index gave us links to key discussions instead of keywords? So in particular, you would have links to cards, as he says, that serve as entry points into the discussion, and cards that point to key moments in the discussion. So what do you think about that idea? That's really what we want to have happen with our Zettelkasten. We have this idea, the concept of the voice in the box, the other mind, the other brain in the box. And I got to see that happening when I get to explore why not directly oppose, why these daughter virtues, and I would just love to explain that to you because that's my area, but I won't take that time. But those discussions are what a Zettelkasten is all about, is getting those kinds of discussions where you're there, you're the only one at that moment, but you're relating to this author and that author and the differences, because the two different approaches are going to play off one another. They're looking at the world. Two different authors are looking at the world. They're on the same subject. They're in the same field, so they're close, but they're not quite the same. And boy, oh boy, does that get the creative juices flowing. So why not have an entire discussion, key discussion index? And I'm thinking that is so fascinating that, I mean, obviously I'm not going to tank, 1,000 index cards, but would that be a reason to have another set of alphabetical dividers? Would it be time for me to say, okay, how do you take a character and help them progress from a deficiency in a character trait to strong in that character trait, especially if he has to make that transition to strength in order to combat the real villain and achieve the goal and, be the hero of the story. So what is that path? how do you show a path that demonstrates the problem area and shows a believable transition to going from a weakness to a strength to the power to combat a villain. So to me, in my fiction writing, that is just a spectacularly interesting discussion that I would want. And so I'm thinking that, Alex, I think you're onto something here. And I think I'm going to make my first entry into my key discussion area. And if I think about all the other times that I've bumped into key discussions like this, because sometimes you're filing things and it's just information that builds on other information. And if it's important information to your field, like the stuff that I was learning, I'm exploring more deeply the psychology side as opposed to like the philosophy and theology. And so I'm encountering things like the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Problems. And so that's important for me to learn, especially if I'm going to start learning more about the psychology ends of it. Now, I do have a background in psychology, strangely, and 3 scientific papers published in the field of psychology, but that was as a statistician. I was the statistician on 3 research papers with Dr. Thomas DeShawn. So I don't have that background other than like a required undergraduate class in psychology, one semester of psychology. So my point there is that, a lot of the cards that you're going to be putting in your Zettelkasten are background information that you need to have to be competent in the area that you're studying. And yes, it's important, but those key discussions are what make a Zettelkasten magic. And I think, Alex, you're onto something with tracking an index of those. I would say in addition to, not instead of. But, try it out for yourself. Maybe that key discussion plus just a keyword is enough. For me, when I narrowed it down to a keyword, half of my brain went on vacation. And not only that, it would start pestering me with other things. Oh, but did you wash the kitchen? Remember, you want to wash the kitchen floor. You haven't done that in a long time. So it's not just like it went on vacation. It starts pestering me with junk. Well, not to say that the kitchen floor is junk, but it did get washed, finally. Thank you. I've gone on enough. Good night.